Ed, thanks so much for coming on the show. Before we jump into your why, I'd like to ask a few questions so our audience can learn a little bit more about you.
Sure, sounds great.
Can you tell us a little bit about your personal background and what you did before social media influence?
Sure. I had an early kind of interest in entrepreneurship and business and things like that, and I just tried to do different things. And in and around the car industry, I started an exotic car rental company while I was a student at Georgia Tech, and that was in the early days of social media. It was '05, '06, '07, and so there was not really, we just used Facebook at that point to find people who were in our classes, not really for social networking. But it was, it was an interesting time and kind of the first days of being able to advertise very inexpensively. And that's always been kind of my approach to social media. It's been about personal branding and really trying to just, get whatever messaging out there that I cared about. And so started to continue in the exotic car rental industry, sold exotic cars for a little while, and then we started VINwiki.
All right. So before starting VINwiki, what was your personal social presence like at that time?
Well, in 2013, I set the world record for the Cannonball Run, driving from New York to LA faster than anyone ever had. And after that, I started to get a strong surge in my personal social media following. So that was pretty amazing and entirely unexpected. I didn't think I'd be as successful at it as I was. It all worked out really, really well. And so I started to grow a social following, and I continued to keep the momentum going through car sales at the dealership, because pretty much every day I'd have some interesting car to post a picture of, and capturing automotive social media presence is maybe one of the most straightforward.
Okay. So aside from having social presence to help with your business, what were some reasons of why you started sharing online?
Well, because of a lot of the things that I was doing, both through the Cannonball, through car sales, through group drives and activities, it was a very efficient way to kind of bulk message people without them necessarily having to be in a direct line of communication. So it's convenient to be able to blast something out on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter and know that, anybody who was interested was probably going to be able to find it.
Was it when you started in the early days, was it a conscious choice that this would become something where you'd have this much influence and that you'd be able to build a lifestyle around it? Or how did you look at it back then?
Absolutely not. I mean, today I think I have like 60,000 Instagram followers, which for monetary purposes is absolutely worthless. Like, nobody's ever asked me to pay me to put up anything on Instagram, and I've never really solicited that. But for the YouTube thing, which is what we currently do a lot of, that was totally accidental. I had an app called VINwiki that's kind of like a social vehicle history reporting platform, kind of like a crowdsourced version of Carfax. And we started the app, and it grew a little bit. And anytime you start something or you put a website out online, you think that everybody's just going to immediately flock to it. It's going to take the world by storm. Well, it doesn't really work that way. Call it customer acquisition is expensive. User acquisition is expensive. And so I didn't have a tremendous amount of luck that first year. And then we started a YouTube channel just because we had other social media properties. We had an Instagram account, a Facebook account. We hadn't really done much on YouTube other than just an introductory video early on in the life cycle of the company. And so I got a bunch of friends together, and we just started sitting around telling car stories, and kind of overnight, it just blew up. We thought we shot the first 25 of them the first day, and then a friend of mine edited them, and we kind of thought, well, if we ended up with 2,000 views per video, 50,000 total, maybe then we would just decide to keep doing it. Well, we got 800,000 views, kind of kept building from there. And so he did not want this to become his full-time job. So I was kind of on my own. I had to kind of replicate his whole setup and his camera system and all that, and just start doing it myself. So I edited about the next 450 or so. And then finally, I've been able to hire an editor.
Wow. So when you did the first 25 episodes, did you just post one a day for basically a month and schedule them out?
Correct. Yeah. So there's between 21 and 23 weekdays in a month. And so my guy that edited them was like, well, do you want to release one a week or whatever? I'm like, no, I'll just one a day. Let's figure out if this is going to work. because I didn't have the time or patience to let this slow burn into meaningfulness. I just wanted to let it eat.
That's awesome. So going for your reasons of starting back then to your reasons of continuing now, have those reasons changed for you? Like, what's the reason that you're continuing doing this?
The reason I do it is because it is essentially a negative cost of user acquisition for our app. That's still the main core business model, is to build up an audience there and be able to kind of use that size and significance to accumulate a massive amount of automotive data that these users really find to be interesting, and I do as well. So that's why we do it. It results in, about 500 new users a day in our app for less than free. We do make a little bit of money off of it. So from a startup perspective, that's a really, really unique thing, because everybody's out there trying to think of how they're going to raise money to get users at $3 or $5 or $10 per user, and we get them for less than free. It just takes an entirely different full-time job to do it.
I like that. So going into that a little bit more, do you consider yourself as someone with influence?
It seems that way. I didn't set out to be influential. I guess it's happened, and I enjoy that. I love going to car shows and having people come up and want to talk or take pictures or whatever. I mean, it's strange, but hey, it works. And if I can be inspirational or give people a way to sort of understand their goals in a context that they could look up to, then absolutely. I mean, for me, I love cars, and that's a big part of, my life, certainly professionally, but I'm also a Christian, and I really care about being able to bring glory to God through whatever I do. And so enlarging the platform to move and do things like that has really, really been awesome to spread, any message that I like to talk about.
Nice. Yeah, I saw some of those videos on your personal YouTube channel.
Yeah, that's been weird. I accidentally started that about a month ago because I had accumulated 10,000 YouTube subscribers on the Ed Bolian channel, which I sometimes use to comment on the VINwiki channel. And then so I was like, all right, I probably ought to make him a video there. That's the audience. Why not? And so I did. And then that video gained me 25,000 new subscribers. And so I just have kept doing it once a week. And so I like that because it gives me a little bit more creative flexibility if I want to put something up that's different. Like today, I released a guide to how to tell a good story, mostly for my own sake, so it'll make the editing easier moving forward. Hopefully people will watch it before they come try to tell stories. But it's, just whatever you want to put out there. I guess there's usually somebody who wants to see it.
All right. So before you even had one video on your personal channel, you had 10,000 subscribers just from commenting?
Yeah. I had like 30 when we started VINwiki from a couple of videos that I'd put out years and years ago about like cars that I'd owned and stuff, just literally like slideshows of pictures, nothing that took more than 30 minutes. But didn't have any. And then that's where it came from.
All right. Well, was there a moment that you just sort of thought to yourself like, oh man, I really do have like impact or influence? Like, is there a moment that it clicked for you that you're getting these views and you're getting this attention, or your people are contacting you saying that you're having some impact on them? Is there a moment that transition happened? Is there something that comes to mind for you?
It was fairly immediate, which was wild. Like it just went nuts. So like of the first 10 or so videos that we released, one was the Lamborghini prostitute video, the McLaren F1 maintenance video, my wife buying a Ferrari from a rapper's parents, and the one about Balboni crashing a friend of mine's Lamborghini. Each of those got like 50 to 100,000 views like overnight. It was crazy. And the rest did okay, but those four kind of carried the channel for the first month or two. And that was wild to me just to see immediately people like, wow, this is such new and different and refreshing content. And I mean, it's not like we invented the idea of telling stories, but we just kind of found a convenient and templated way to memorialize them.
I like that.
Welcome to the Why Influence Podcast, where we deep dive into the why behind some of the world's most influential people. Why do you influence? Why are you an influencer? We hope to inspire you to share your voice with the world. And now, your host, Jeremy Siegel.
When you were first starting out, or maybe in your early days, did you have any personal or physical barriers? Like, did you think about posting these YouTube videos for a while and then just not do it for a while for any reason? Or is there like any kind of barriers that you can think of that you had to overcome?
People had told me for probably 2 years prior that I ought to do some more stuff on YouTube. They felt like I'd be able to grow an audience. And I had a lot of friends that were YouTubers. I've known Doug DeMuro for 10 years and Tavarish and that dude in blue and TJ Hunt and all these guys. And it was all great. And so I saw that, but I was like, I don't know how to edit videos. I don't have any equipment. I don't have the time, knowing that, generally if you want to make a 10-minute video, you're looking at about a 10-hour commitment. And so I was like, well, that all sounds well and good, but it ain't for me. Well, eventually we started to think a little bit more about what would be effective to promote the app. And really, VINwiki Car Stories is the idea that a post that would be very fitting in the app is sort of blown up into this longer form story. And so, it's happened, it's worked, and it's been fun, but it was all very accidental. And it was hard early on because the only place I had to shoot them was a big old warehouse, and it had a terrible echo, and it was hot or cold, and neighbors were noisy, and it was just a hostile place to make videos. But it was the only thing we had. So after about 200 of them, I got sick of it. And I went in and I'd asked my landlord at my warehouse, which had a big, like 4,000 square foot storage space and about 1,000 square feet of built out offices. But none of the rooms were big enough for me to really record in. And so I asked my landlord if I could move. And he said no. In fact, he said he was about to kick me out just because we were paying so far below market rate. So I was like, well, just forget we had this conversation. And I went in that next night and just tore out a wall between two rooms to give me enough space to do it. And so that ended up working for a little while. Then they did try to kick me out, and they tripled my rent. And so we had to move it in December to my house. Now we shoot them here.
Okay. So probably, I guess one of your early barriers was just finding a consistent, good space to create the content.
Yeah. I mean, the issue that most people find with content creation is you have to do it so consistently and so frequently that if you don't have something that you're going to recreate over and over and over again, it's just so hard to sustain, because growth happens from consistent creation. It doesn't happen just because of how cool you are or how popular a video gets or anything like that. Like, I had a guy come and film the other day. They had a video early on in their channel get 21 million views, just went totally viral, had a miserable ad rates. They didn't make all that much money from it, but they started a channel from it. They gained like 150,000 subscribers overnight, which has helped them to continue to sustain growth, but their view counts aren't that great because it's just so hard for them to produce the same level of content each day.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So I'm curious, if you're thinking back who you were before you got this record with the gumball to before your influence sort of came up, and who you are today, how do you think this whole world has changed you?
I'm not really sure. I mean, fortunately, because of the nature of what we're doing, I'm not acting, I'm not putting on a show. I don't get in front of a camera and scream vlog style to be larger than life. Like, I just talk about stuff that I've done. And most of it, I'm able to speak about it in a way that makes it sound a lot cooler than it actually was at the time, which is really cool, I guess. But other than maybe looking at my past through some rosier colored glasses, I don't know that I'd like to think it hasn't changed me.
Okay. Do you have any memorable stories of people that have contacted you just saying, hey, I found this video, or just somebody that's reached out that wouldn't have reached out if you weren't sharing online? Like, any kind of memorable story of someone you've influenced come to you and say how much of an impact you had on them or anything like that?
Well, the cool thing is, I mean, I have that happen a few dozen times a day. I'll get Facebook messages or Instagram messages or whatever of just people saying, hey, this video really impacted me. It made me just go ahead and bite the bullet, bite this car that I've been dreaming about for so long. I was able to do this thing that I was really worried about. I took the time off from work and went out and chased this passion project. So fortunately, that stuff is rather frequent, and I love hearing it. At this point, the volume of it is honestly getting to the point that I can't always read it all, but I do my best to respond to as many of them as I can. I just don't have 6 or 7 hours a day to attend to social media messages. Mm-hmm. But it's definitely been wild to see it grow.
That's awesome. Well, through this journey of creating all this content, it's a lot of work to do that. So have you ever struggled with motivation to put content out there or to get things together? And if you have, do you have any examples that you can share and maybe how you powered through it?
So I am a very, very lazy person, and I don't crave working. Like, I don't enjoy some rhythm and grind of having to go through and like make a video every day. However, I don't have any trouble seeing past the effort required to the end goal in mind. And with YouTube, you kind of get descriptive analytics rather than prescriptive analytics. So the only things that you can decide are, should I do what I did yesterday again, or should I do something different? And with any level of success, the only logical answer is you should do what you did yesterday again, and doing anything different would threaten that success. And so it's easy for me to see how my effort is worthwhile now. And it was fairly easy early on. I mean, when we started to see the views get consistent, we started to be able to predict a little bit more of how a video would do. We started to accumulate an engaged audience, and all that happened rather quickly. I don't know if I could have pushed through like a really slow growth rate, but since it happened pretty fast, it was a lot easier for me as a person. And so seeing that makes it easy to get up every day and invite people into film and deal with the editing and deal with the gathering of pictures and actually deal with the release, engage with the audience. The work of it I can manage to do despite being lazy, because I do see an immediate and tangible result from it.
Okay.
But it's a real job, man.
So as you niche down and create content similar to the day before because it's what's working, do you ever feel like you get tired of creating the same style and type of content? I know you mentioned how you liked on your personal channel where you could just be creative and post things that are a little bit different. But do you ever see that as anything that's affecting your motivation?
Not really, because quite honestly, I don't view social media as an outlet to creativity. It can be for many people, and I'm glad that it is. I love, scrolling through Instagram and seeing beautiful hand lettering or photography that took a 3-hour hike and to get to this place and take a picture. Like, the fact that people are using it in that way, that hasn't been it for me. So I don't feel stymied by the fact that I really do need to keep producing car stories on VINwiki. I love that there's a fire hose of car stories that are sent to me every day, and I can't engage with most of them, but I appreciate the enthusiasm. I think we may try to figure out a way at some point to, filter through those in a little bit of a different way and have a little bit more openness to other people coming on. But it's it's working, and it's a lot of work, but it's a manageable amount of work. I can't imagine how these guys like, Damon Fryer from Daily Driven Exotics, or Shmi, or these guys that go around doing a different car thing every day. Like, maybe it's my personal introversion or something like that, but it just sounds like absolutely awful.
Do you mind going into a little bit of what your team looks like to be able to pull off what it is that you're doing? You talk about how you've now got a video editor, and you're getting all these stories that are being sent in. You don't have the bandwidth to read all of them. So what does your team look like right now?
So I got a bunch of people together at the end of 2015 and kind of pitched them the idea of the VINwiki app. And it was friends of mine that had different skill sets, but amongst the group, there was a front-end app developer, a front-end web developer, a back-end database developer, kind of a CTO to manage it all. And so we all came together and we built what currently exists as the VINwiki app. And one of them had done some stuff in YouTube in the past, and it had really been pushing me to try to do something with it with respect to VINwiki, feeling like it would be successful. And Nostradamus he was correct, but I was pretty reluctant to try it, just because you kind of take this social risk of putting yourself out there and trying something that may or may not work. And that's never a comfortable situation to be in. But we started doing that, and it looked pretty quickly as though this could be worthwhile. We were seeing good growth in the app. We were seeing the possibility of some revenue, and I was actually having a pretty good success rate of recruiting sponsors to support the channel. And so I kind of set them all down, and we said, how valuable does everybody think this is? And the consensus was very valuable, but no one else wanted to do any work about it. So essentially it was on me, like, Ed, if you want to make this your job, like, you can keep all the spoils that come from it, but we're not really interested in helping. And so I was like, well, it does make sense. And so I just started. And so for about the first probably a year and a half, I did 100% of the editing, which was a terrible learning curve. Like there's 25 that my buddy edited that were great. Then there's about 20 abysmal failures that I don't have a clue what I'm doing, some of which have way more views than they deserve. And then there was yes, we did that. And I think I got us to about right at 700,000 subscribers. And then I was able to hire an editor, which has helped me a lot, not in having more free time, but in freeing up time to do things that I was otherwise neglecting.
Okay. So right now it's mostly you and a video editor.
Him, yeah. So 2 people now, but I've done it as one for a long, long time.
Yeah, that's impressive. Making it all the way to 700,000 just solo.
Well, the 2 things that hurt people that are trying to build an audience are an inability to release content regularly and usually perfectionism, because you have to be willing to just say that's good enough. Our video today on the channel is a compilation of me and 2 other guys talking about how we orchestrated the effort to buy our dream cars. And it kind of bounces around and back and forth. And I've done this a couple of times. It's really, really hard to edit. And so yesterday we went through 5 different structures of the story, essentially, my editor and I, and letting the other 2 storytellers see it. And it got good. It got definitely watchable. It started the morning yesterday as like, this doesn't make any sense. And so you kind of had to get to the point last night where, sure, if we'd spent 2 more days on it, it would have been better. But you have to send it because it just has to be enough. And that's really, really hard for a lot of people that approach it from a filmmaking background, is that they want it to be better. And it just can't be. Like, there's only so good you can make a video that fundamentally you only have 1 or 2 days to produce.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, actually, when I started this podcast, I gave myself permission to re-record myself in the first 3 because I'm not used to interviewing.
Yeah.
And so I did that, which helps me learn how to interview better and see where my mistakes were. But then I wasn't allowed to do that after that, so I couldn't be perfectionist. I just had to, be vulnerable and make mistakes.
So you would just re-record you asking the questions, and then
yeah, I mean, you can see as an interviewer, I'm only talking for short periods of time, and then you're talking. So I would see all those spots. I would re-record myself any way I want, insert it into that spot, and then just did that for the first 3 interviews.
Perfect.
All right, so moving on to the future, what's inspiring you most about the future, and what VINwiki has that's coming, what your personal brands, any of that stuff? What's inspiring you most about the future for you?
Honestly, for the past year at least, I've woken up every day thinking the future was something different than it was the day before. You really can't guess. None of us know what the horizon is for the audience of YouTube as a whole, whether Facebook watch or Instagram video or something that we don't even know what it is yet is somehow going to take the world over, and that the audience that we have is just not going to be there. you know, it doesn't matter how much money you make on YouTube or how big your audience is. It is the most fragile feeling stream of revenue you could ever imagine. And that's okay, because I don't count on it to like do anything. But it's terrifying also that I don't have the slightest clue what's going to happen next. And I'm enjoying it a lot because of what it is. But I mean, goodness gracious, there's just no telling. So I'm excited about what the app is becoming. We get, you know, when we're about to pass 200,000 registered users in it. And that means that we're just, you know, getting closer and closer to like truly a critical mass where when you post something, you're going to see something interesting about a car. And I'm getting contacted more and more by people saying, man, I was looking at this car and I found out this, whether it was, you know, a car that was spotted with some damage or with some modifications or used in some crime. Like they're just, you know, they love knowing the kind of information that we gather on VINwiki. And so I'm really excited to see where that goes. And I'm very, very thrilled that the social media audience is what's fueling that.
So you're in a different boat than the average person because you have this app that you could sort of fall back on. I mean, if your YouTube stuff changed for whatever reason, I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen with that. You know, maybe people shifting platforms or whatever, but you having this app really gives you a little bit more comfort. Is that a good way to put it? Or
it might be, but the app doesn't make any money, which is worth noting. So
okay.
YouTube has allowed me to give the app a lot more time to grow than if I was just sitting here going broke. So that's good. I will say that if it weren't for the app, if it weren't for a bigger purpose, I would not personally have made the decision to produce content. I don't enjoy it that much. I've had a lot of fun with it. I'm so glad that my stories have reached such an amazing audience, and I'm so glad they've enjoyed them, found something in them, usually things that I didn't expect anyone to find in them. But you need to have a bigger picture. Like, I don't want to be famous. I don't want to be as famous as I already am. Like, that's a total accident, and I'm not even sure how to wrap my head around it for the rest of my life. But I don't plan on doing this forever, because it's not necessarily me. Like, everything that I'm putting on there is authentic and it's true, but this is not something I sat in my bedroom at night dreaming about for years, like the day that a lot of people were going to watch me on YouTube.
All right. Well, to this point, you've given a lot of advice just through this interview, but if you were to meet someone who's just starting out or maybe right before starting out and they wanted some advice from you, what would be some advice that you give this person?
It's pretty straightforward. Come up with an idea that you can template so that you can do it over and over again. Build yourself up a cushion. So we did 25 videos before we released one. So we knew that we at least got to watch for a minute and then be reactive with enough of a cushion to change things if we had to, and we had to change a lot. Don't be a perfectionist, because you can't be, and release content as often as you can. And whatever it is that you decide is your content release strategy, stick to it and don't let your own laziness impact it.
That's awesome. So you've grown a channel to over 800,000 subscribers, 700 basically by yourself, and you have a personal channel with roughly 50,000 subscribers at this point, 53.
Hey,
what's your secret sauce? I mean, for someone who's more established and, you know, you have some, do you have any advice for them? Like maybe things that you think that you're doing differently that could help benefit someone who's more established?
So there's a ton of people that have way more subscribers than we do, but they don't have the views. And that's tough, because what they're really seeing is that their subscribed audience's appetite for the content that they're producing has changed. And that's a really, really hard thing on YouTube. And so when they see their view counts drop, there's a pride that swells up and says, no, this is what I do here. And if they don't want it, then it's their fault. But the problem is, like, you've got to be reactive to your audience. And so, when I see that we have storytellers that are requested more often, types of stories that just do better, lengths of stories that do better, I've got to be reactive to that and to make sure that I'm providing content, not just because it's exactly what I want to exist in the world, but so that I actually, achieve what the medium wants, because there's only so long you can last standing on your own, principles of what you want your content to be. In that kind of case, spin off another channel and do what it is you've always wanted to be doing, and figure out what your big audience wants on your big channel.
That's awesome advice. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Well,
Sure.
Ed, I appreciate you coming on here and sharing your why. I'd like to end the podcast by giving you an opportunity to talk about your social accounts, your app, or anything else you'd like to share with the audience.
I really appreciate it, and thank you for taking the time. You can find me at Ed Bolian on pretty much anything, and at VINwiki everywhere else, except on Instagram, where someone continues to squat on at VINwiki, and it's at VINwiki_official.
Awesome. Well, Ed, thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing your journey. I hope you have a great remainder of 2019. I look forward to seeing your influence and app keep on growing.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thanks. Well, that concludes the interview. Thanks for sticking around to the end. Ed, thanks again for coming on the show. This interview I did a little bit differently than other interviews. We actually did it with video turned on. Even though this is an audio podcast, we did it with the video on. And I thought it was very interesting seeing how dynamic Ed was. He was just laid back, sitting back in his chair, and just really dynamic, using his hands and gestures. And I'm sitting like upright, barely moving and not being too dynamic. So it was just a little bit of self-awareness that I got from doing this interview with video, because I'm used to just doing audio only, and I don't really think about how I'm looking or how I'm acting. And as I'm going through this journey, it's just good to be aware of that. So audio, there's a lot less components than video. I think there's a lot more components to video, and it makes it a little bit more complicated to do it well. I'm pretty blown away that Ed is doing this pretty much on his own and solo. He's built up 700,000 YouTube subscribers by editing his own video, creating his own stories, posting his own stuff on social media. Like, he's done this in a very lean manner, whereas a lot of other people that I've interviewed that have this level of influence or this level of subscriber base usually has a bigger team that's helping him with that. So I think that's hats off to Ed for handling everything from a lean manner and being able to handle everything on his own. Ed gave us a ton of advice in this episode. Even before I asked him for advice, he was just spitting advice out and just giving advice. So I'm going to recap some of that advice right now. He said to focus on the bigger picture. He talked about how he doesn't know if he could actually be doing what he's doing now if he didn't have the bigger picture or the purpose of his app to help drive him to create this content. And that's really important to take into consideration when you're choosing your topic, is that you need a bigger picture and something that can help drive you through that. And for him, it's the app. Ed talked about coming up with an idea that you can template. He's very big into low effort content creation, which is part of how he has so much success. It's not completely draining him to spit out all the videos that he's putting out, because he's come up with a template and some kind of workflow that works for him, so he doesn't have to go out there and create new car videos on new cars and just put a ton of effort into these videos. And that allows him to put more content out there, and that's what he attributes to his success. So if you come up with an idea that you can template your content, then that will help you for creating more of that content. Ed talked about creating a cushion, but not too big of a cushion where you can't react. He talked about when he launched his YouTube channel, he recorded about 25 pieces of content to release over a month period. And then after that month, he can evaluate how he wants to handle it and create another chunk of content, release that, and then wait and see how it reacts, and then how the audience reacts, and then go from there. So he's creating chunks, but not chunks big enough to allow him to constantly create content and push it out there, but not chunks so large that if he did it the wrong way, he's not able to react to what the audience wants. And I think that's a pretty good point. Ed reiterated multiple times during the episode that a big stopping point for people is being too perfect and wanting things to be too perfect. He attributes a lot of his success to the fact that he isn't feeling that way, and that he can just push stuff out there and not be like, oh, this needs to be perfect and I can't push it out. Don't feel like you need your content to be perfect. And then he said to stick to a content release strategy. He said consistency is really important. We've heard that before. So if you come up with a content release strategy, just stick to it. And that's something that your audience is going to pay attention to. Ed talked about how some channels can have more subscribers but get less views on videos. And he talked about how subscriber desires can change over time, or maybe what you create is changing and it's not desirable to the subscribers anymore. He talked about how he gets a very high view ratio to subscriber base compared to most channels, and he attributes that to just sticking to what the subscribers like, so that you can have that as a base for your viewership, and then you can go from there. Whereas if you make a pivot or change and then people don't want to watch it anymore, then you won't have that base of views to launch the video and get it out there, and then it may not perform long term as good. So that's something just to consider, and nobody's really brought that up before, so I thought it was pretty interesting. Ed talked about how it's really important to be reactive to your audience. If people have requests, then listen to those requests and try to incorporate them into the content that you create. Just be reactive to your audience. And a lot of channels die or just get stagnant because they're not reacting. And Ed was a very big proponent to making sure that you react to your audience. Some advice that Ed gave to established channels is to keep the channel that you have doing what it's doing and doing what's working. And then if you want to do something else, just create a spin-off channel and start creating content there. But let your main big channel keep growing and keep doing what works with that. If you do a big pivot from there and your audience doesn't follow you with it, then it's probably not going to be the best decision. But if you create a separate channel where you can be more creative and do things that are more experimental, then maybe that's something that's more fitting to helping you have the drive to keep doing what you're doing. Now, moving on to how I'm doing as an interviewer and with this podcast, I think I've improved a bit with sharing some of myself. I talked about how I re-recorded myself in the first 3 episodes and related that story to something that Ed was talking about. And I think that brought the conversation down to a more level playing field, instead of me just being here spitting questions out and getting his value add responses. I'm sort of contributing some of myself into the conversation. And I think that's something that is important to do and is important to keep growing upon. So I hope that I can get better at sharing myself and contributing more to the conversation. I feel like I was a bit stiff in the beginning. Like I sort of asked questions, got his responses, asked questions, got his responses. And I didn't feel like I was coming across as hearing what he's saying. And then as the conversation evolved, I feel like I loosened up a bit and we had more of a conversation instead of an actual interview. And that's what I'm going for, is I'm trying to get more towards having a conversation with people and getting the answers to the questions that we have, but more in a conversation manner than an actual just interview that's just intense and rigid. I just wanted to point out that this interview would not have been possible if I didn't create this podcast. I mean, so many things had to line up for this interview to happen. I had to be willing to share my journey online through my Facebook. I had to be willing to post on Facebook and say, hey, does anybody have any suggestions of influencers you'd like me to bring on my podcast? A friend posted on that. I took the initiative to reach out to that person. And I think that having an established podcast with a batch of episodes helped give credibility to the podcast, so that Ed was willing to just say, yeah, that works. Let's do it. And I don't think a week or 2 weeks ago I could have pulled off getting this interview, because I wasn't really posting on my personal Facebook. I didn't have as much of an established podcast. So it's just something that I wanted to share, is that I think I was on the edge of capability for being able to land this specific interview with Ed. Thanks so much for listening to the Why Influence podcast. If you're new here, then go ahead and subscribe. You can be notified of all the new episodes as they're released. If you're a returning listener, then please just go to iTunes and leave us a review. Those reviews help us bring on bigger and better guests. If you would like to learn more about Ed, just go to our website. You can go to www.whyinfluence.com, whyinfluence.com, and navigate to episode 11, and that's Ed's episode. We're going to have links to all his YouTube channels, his personal YouTube channel, all his social media, his website, his app. We're going to have all that information on the website, so feel free to go there and check that out. While you're on the website, you might as well scroll to the bottom of the page and subscribe to our newsletter. We're going to be sending out some important announcements to the newsletter, and if you want to be notified of things, then that's the place to subscribe. Aside from that, I just want to reiterate, iTunes reviews are really important for bringing on bigger and better guests. So please go to iTunes and leave us a review. And thanks for listening. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.